Since the success of The Mandalorian and the backlash of the new sequel, it's no wonder Disney started to focus on making shows on the streaming platform. On paper it may sound good, but in execution it's horrendous. With many shows feeling like it's written by a third grader and the quality matching a badly painted space marine, causing many of their shows to be downright unwatchable. As time goes by, somehow it gets progressively worse.
Okay, 3, 2, almost tasted that. Num 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 num, eat it up.
Which leads us to Boba Fett, a perfect example of the standard Disney quality. A badly written show, production being all over the place, and ruining beloved characters, the holy trinity of modern writing. In the case of Boba Fett, in truth he never had a character in the original OT. He was just a guy with a cool looking design embodying the badass bounty hunter persona, and just being the antagonist for Han Solo. Having a dedicated show about him, I tend to find it to be a good idea, to flesh him out as a character to better understand who he is. However, this is Disney production, and any respect for characters or interesting ideas is heresy in their eyes and should be burned to cinders. That being the case, they cast Tamura Morrison that doesn't fit the part at all. They tried to make him look badass, but he embodies a dad, not a deadly experienced assassin, just someone you'll find being in the family cookout. And a disclaimer for him and for the rest of the cast, I feel bad for all of them, that their face is being used to represent a terribly managed show. They deserve to be in a show written by an actual adult. Already, the casting is a big mess, but that's the least problematic part, because it's a decision what they decided to do with his character. For starters, the Sarlacc pit, where he crawls out of it, gets mugged by a bunch of Jawa, gets captured by Tusken Raiders. This is the first episode and it's gone terribly wrong. How we get no explanation how long was Boba inside the pit, or explains why he's gotten a lot thicker, because you think inside being a creature for X amount of time, you'd be looking like a skinny emo chick. Getting back on track, we get no sense of time for him being inside the creature, giving us this janky introduction. At least give us a timestamp, because my best headcanon is that inside the Sarlacc pit was the warp, changing him and spewing him out at any length of time. After he gets out, a bunch of Jawa shows up and mugs Boba off his suit. Really, you have Jawa take down Boba, one of the least intimidating creatures in Star Wars. In any of his days, you think a deadly bounty hunter like him would be used to this type of scenarios and would easily beat a bunch of small creatures regardless of their numbers. But they didn't need to explain how guest character number 48 managed to get his suit. Eventually, Tusken Raider finds him and takes him back to his tribe to be turned into a captive/slave for them. Now, why couldn't they have them attack Boba instead of by a Jawa, ignoring the foreseen guest character reason? Since they are notorious for attacking people, well, it turns out they're actually good Tusken Raiders. Upon Boba Fett managed to kill a creature that shouldn't exist in a desert-like setting, he was accepted by them, learning their ways and realizing that not all Tusken Raiders are bad. This is the most Weenie Hut Jr. sugar-coated Disney writing to be given to someone like Boba Fett. A character where you think in this scenario would see his survival skills in attempting an escape using the environment around him as a weapon to tackle his captives. No, instead an alien dog just puts him down without any challenge and learns to be some kind of hermit towards the end. His tribe gets destroyed by first believing to be some kind of biker gang, but it turns out to be some other organization. He finds Fennec and convinces her to help him retrieve his armor and kill Bib Fortuna, who replaced Jabba after his death. After completing his side quest, he essentially becomes the leader of a syndicate, which I don't know if this is something that Boba Fett wants, since the impression I got from him was a desperado, a lone ranger, doing jobs to get by. Like I said, it would be great if I had a show that explains to me what's Boba Fett's motivation. Now, he does have an explanation, and to be honest, I just wish he had never had one. This is honestly the better option. Apparently, he had a campfire with her before going after their side quests, explaining that they're just shaft, tools to be tossed aside by their leader, and they should be the ones in charge, which makes no sense at all since it was Boba that got himself in danger, how he managed to get hit by a blind Han Solo, causing him to fly straight to the pit. His bosses were pretty respectful to him, how Darth Vader was willing to compensate Boba if anything went wrong due to Han Solo being carbonated. Another thing, he's a bounty hunter. He makes the big boy decisions to choose what jobs, and they usually come with a risk that could result in his death. If anything could go wrong, it's either by his bad decision or shit luck. So Boba becomes in charge and does a piss poor job at it, and before we can begin the list of problems, first, we need to talk about a personal issue that I have, where many people refer to him as a daimyo for his position of power. It makes no sense why they call Boba Fett a daimyo. To give a bit of history, daimyo in Japanese means great name. It was a nickname given to those who held great influence and power on a province during the Sengoku Jidai. Originally it was called shogu, meaning great military land governor, but after the emperor lost its influence over his lords, daimyo kind of replaced it. Eventually Tokugawa Ieyasu became shogunate, so the word daimyo became an official title, with many of them being loyal to the shogunate. Going back to Boba Fett being called daimyo, the reason why it makes no sense is they have someone above him who's in charge, being a shogunate. Or, if they're doing the Sengoku Jidai version, is there other daimyos like him competing for the same position of power? Another important aspect of being called daimyo is having power and influence, where eventually many vassals, families, or daimyos, I don't know who they are because it didn't clarify it in the show, eventually all betray him towards the end, signing with the Pikes, a powerful crime syndicate. As for power, his command consists of an ex-bounty hunter, a group of teenage cyberpunk rejects, a monster, and a Wookiee. This is a joke, right? Because there's no way you name someone a daimyo for someone that controls a province with such a near non-existent power. Also, why daimyo? Boba Fett's a crime lord. He should be called yakuza, mafia, or whatever terminology of crime boss in Star Wars. Don't use words you have little understanding behind its meaning and history. During his reign, we see him do a terrible job at managing his province, where the poor excuse of not even half a dozen militia he hired are all terrible people, like the cyberpunk teens, where they stole water from an old man since it was too expensive. Yeah, no shit, it's a desert environment, where water is scarce. Boba Fett shows up and hears their excuses that they have no job and it's expensive, so instead of punishing them for their crimes, he hires them to work for him and punishes the old man for selling the expensive water. Like, what the hell is even this direction? Look at all these augments, clothes, and clean-looking bikes. If they're supposed to be poor with no job, how can they afford all of this? Compared to the old man who's portrayed as a greedy dirtbag by wearing ragged, simple clothes. Like, goddamn, call the director for this misdirection. Then you have the Wookiee where he beats up a bunch of poor bastards that were gambling, minding their own business. These folks did nothing wrong. He just sits there, stares at them for having a good time, and chooses violence. Boba shows up, and instead of punishing him for beating up the civilians, he hires him as well. Of course, the excuse will be he's a crime lord. He usually hires scum people that are loyal to him, which is fair enough. However, Boba Fett does not want to rule by fear. He wants to rule by respect. I'm going to stop him right there and say that's stupid. Why would that be better? Here's a movie that actually discussed this in the Bronx Tale where you have Sonny, a mob boss, telling Caballero the benefits of ruling with love or fear. So he asks which one is better and responds,
"But if I had my choice, I would rather be feared. It lasts longer than love. It keeps them loyal to me. But the trick is not to be hated."
To keep in line with this respect, he makes the other families, which I'm going to call them, not to sell spices because it's bad, which is apparently drugs or something in Star Wars, and never clarified this in the show. What kind of business is he running? A charity? This is a syndicate. You ain't gonna run Jabba's palace with hugs and kisses. One of the things I need to emphasize is that he killed Bib Fortuna, which is not uncommon amongst criminals, but he did it without first establishing a web of influence to overthrow him. Instead, he just kills them and forces the families to comply with him, or they end up with the same fate. At the same time, he is forcing them not to sell spice because it's bad. So it's no wonder where towards the end of the show the families betray him. While Boba Fett in his Mickey Mouse Clubhouse is creating a coup, halfway through the show it gets a stroke and becomes the Mandalorian/Jedi show, where you have a lot of the runtime being spent on them for the show that's called Boba Fett. To summarize the other parts of the story is that Mando is trying to redeem himself to join back his cult, since he couldn't tell a white lie that he showed his face in an unavoidable situation. In his creed, there's no excuses, so he gets kicked out, despite being the only 3 members left, with Mando taking the sacred sword with him. Good job, Later. You're sure doing a fine job keeping your chapter alive. So he must find the Mandalorian planet that became a death world to be able to join back. As for the Jedi side of the story, you have Luke bordering on child abuse, how he's training Grogu. Like, you'll think a little bit more about meditation, focusing on understanding the Force instead of doing flips and getting shot. Luke's reputation in Disney Star Wars is bad. This show is not doing him any favors. Grogu gets a choice, to stay in the Jedi Order or be with Mando. He chooses Mando's instead. Most likely this influence was picked by the child abuse and due to the sequels having Kylo Ren burning the Jedi Temple, which would have meant Grogu died. Mando shows up to Tatooine to get his new ship and gets hired by Fennec to help them out in the shitty situation that Boba got himself into, where the large crime syndicate called the Pikes shows up to Tatooine due to Boba's genius move not to sell their project in his terrain. A large battle will commence, which is one of the most embarrassing conclusions for a show I've seen, where our heroes are trying to plan out a strategy to take on a powerful foe. Boba suggests to defend himself at the palace for the attack, but the cyber team says that's dumb, since it's cowardice to hide behind a wall and abandoning the people. So he convinces Boba to fight in the streets, which turns out to be horrible to the people, since many of the civilians are now in danger by the crossfire. And it gets worse, where a giant robot appears, chasing down our supposed heroes like a Scooby-Doo scene, being fired upon. But the idiots are leading the robot to many of the civilians being caught in a giant robot rampage. But somehow, it gets even worse, where Boba went back to bring back his Rancor that he befriended. It's as stupid as it sounds. He gets scared by Cad Bane's fire and begins rampaging across the whole town, destroying the buildings like a kaiju. To go a bit in depth with their strategy to best explain how excruciatingly dumb they are, where instead of defending themselves in the palace, putting themselves in an advantageous situation, and having the battle away from the village, they choose to spread themselves across town where one by one they get ambushed, being surrounded by the enemy forces. Seeing multiple scenes makes me think this show is a joke. No way a real adult will see this script and think, yep, it's okay. So, in true Disney writing, our heroes win by bullshit means, no matter how bad the situation they put themselves in, where everyone gets a happy ending except for the villains, like Mando reunites with Goku and head off to their adventures. All the Pike leaders gets assassinated in one spot by Fennec, which the scenes feels like a power fantasy by the writers. Boba walks around in the destruction he caused and the people are praising him like a hero. Not gonna lie, that kinda pisses me off a bit. Where Saitama in One Punch Man destroyed a meteor that would have devastated the whole city. However, the meteor created many different small bits, only resulting in damages on property, so the civilians boo him for causing so much damage despite saving all their lives. So going back with Boba, he puts the civilians in danger by choosing to fight inside the town, and has Rancor go off and cause more damage than the enemy, yet people bow to him as if he's a hero. This show is just shit. Before we start wrapping this up, I want to bring up some atrocious scenes that personally insult my eyes. One of the reasons why I rag on the cyber team is how horribly designed they are. Like, look at this girl for example. Why is her arm, except for her hand, is robotic? Is the hand human or just cosmetic? Because if it's human, why? You destroy the hand like a watermelon with multiple rubber bands when attempting to punch someone from the force exerted of the robotic parts. How does your hand work biology-wise? Like, is a robotic hand pumping blood and has nerves attached to it? If it's cosmetic, why half-ass it? Why not completely making the whole arm human? Hell, I think someone just wanted to reverse the robotic hand and human arm, but it looks cursed. Then there are armings where instead of getting cool ones from Cyberpunk like the Mantis armed or Sam Devasteen, no, instead we get Go-Go Gadget's equivalent, where this guy is gently stomping with his leg and the other guy shooting a puny flame. And the Salamander player, I find this insulting, like, put on a gauntlet of fire, you're making Vulcan disappointed. As a whole, their design does not fit in the universe of Star Wars, they stick out like a sore thumb. Then we have an episode of Mando getting his new ship where he entrusts her to find a similar design to his old vessel. Instead, she finds him a Naboo fighter jet that is completely impractical for space travel. This is a single seat, unable to have room where he's able to have space to sleep, stretch, have storage for equipment, or hell, use the bathroom. But no, she insists this is cooler, and we have a whole episode dedicated in building this ship, because apparently the writer for this episode has a fetish for this ship. Another one that's equally embarrassing, where you have a machete that randomly shows up in Star Wars, bringing in the Rancor, and tells us to the audience that this creature is in fact peaceful, gentle, able to bond to anyone he sees like it's a puppy. Even though we've seen it be a horrible monster, how Disney wants to retcon him being a good for whatever reason, even though we just saw him rampaging through the city. This is the last one where he finds one of the few members of his creed. Apparently his family built a dark saber in the past that Mando carries, so he fights to reclaim it. And during this fight, the sword gets heavy because apparently she tells Mando that he's fighting against the sword, resulting in him in being unworthy. Like, what? It's a sword made of light. How is it getting heavier? What sense does that make other than the sword is magic? And fighting against it, what is he, beating up the sword? It's a sword, you just swing and poke at people. This has to be one of the worst Star Wars shows I've recently seen, where the direction is an absolute mess. Not dedicated to one character despite being named the Book of Boba Fett. Instead, they focus on multiple characters, resulting in many being bloated, unnecessary for whatever story they're trying to tell for Boba. The production is all over the place, where Boba Fett scenes are cheaply made, looking like a college set design, with just a boring environment like a desert not being complemented with interesting characters or world building, resulting in me genuinely getting sick and bored watching any scenes that Tatooine is the setting of. while the favorite child gets big productions with the rip of Halo Ring as one of the set designs. As a crime show, they should be jailed for how criminally bad and lazy this is, where they don't bother in being one, or when they try, they just half-ass it, where we never learn what makes spies bad and result in Boba disliking it. We never get any world building for the criminal underworld of Star Wars, instead of focusing on them being good guys but failing horribly. After watching the show, I've learned nothing about Boba Fett other than he's an idiot, since in the show for some reason they want him to be a good guy, even though he is portrayed more as a villain in the OT, but somehow being enslaved by Tusken Raiders resulted in him being good. This feels like a made up new character, not using the aesthetic that made Boba Fett in the OT memorable, with him representing a competent, deadly hunter that Darth Vader personally uses his services. Instead of trying to capture that type of character, they fill in the blanks with an incompetent buffoon, comes across like an idiot with every scene he is in. Because if Robot Chicken does a better job with Boba Fett's character, then something definitely went wrong here, where we see him enacting his revenge, which is something he'll do once he realizes that the old government had all his money destroyed, his employer is dead, and the new government will target him as a criminal. He will most likely put his anger out on the poor rebel soldiers, being a menace in society and trying to find Luke, Han Solo, and Lando to enact his revenge for ruining his livelihood. But that's too interesting for Lucasfilm. Thanks for watching, and bye.